Hi, and welcome to the Route to CISO Podcast. It's me, Kris Rides. I'm going to be your host, and I'm going to be chatting to seasoned Chief Information Security Officers about their career journeys. We're going to be unencrypting their real-life stories and searching for the hidden keys to help you fast-track your cybersecurity career. Thank you for joining me, Larry. Would you please give me an overview of your background and what you're up to now?
Yeah, great to be here, and appreciate the invitation. What I'm up to now, I'm in a really interesting place. If you look at my background, I've been at a lot of larger companies, General Electric and Synchrony and Barclays, and most recently at Health Equity. And I haven't had the chance to explore kind of the venture capital, private equity world and some of that. And so, when you look at my LinkedIn, it says, security and technology executive, whatever that means, right? But at this point, I'm spending a lot of time talking with some startups and working with some VC firms, and just a really interesting view of the world. It's something I definitely encourage people to do.
I love that. I've found we've helped on the staffing front. CISO is my company, and we've helped a few startups really grow from. We had one that was single figures just before their Series A, got an 8-figure Series A, and then really pumped up. And I think we put number 7 in, and right the way up to 58. We didn't place all of those people, otherwise I'd have been retired now. But we helped them get there. We helped them even set up the way that they sort of connected with the people they hired and who those people that they hired knew. And it was such an interesting project. And we've gone on to help quite a few other firms that are in that sort of funding area. And I love it. That just really quick decision makers. They have to think fast. Right. There's so much positive stuff that comes out of working with companies like that. How does it differ as a CISO?
I think it's the technology, right? It's really kind of leading edge technology and doing things differently. I haven't done a CISO role for them, so it's more just advising, and to some extent, if you look at the field CISOs and so that it's a little salesy, right? And they want you to connect with peers and such. What I've found though is when you believe in something, if you believe in a company or you believe in the people of the technology, I feel really comfortable talking about it or saying, hey friend, here's something you should look at.
I love that. I was talking to another friend of mine who's a multiple time CISO, and he's kind of building a group of CISOs at the moment that are sort of advising and investing and just doing some really interesting stuff. They're in a position where they know the tools and the software that they really need, and I see that they actually feel good about getting in and getting involved with them because they want the product to fix some of the problems they've got. So it's an interesting area, and it certainly seems. I see a lot of the VC companies have their own sort of advisory boards with CISOs involved. So it's great, interesting spot. And so I guess the big question. I know a little bit about your background because we've chatted, a few times now. But I would love you to share it with the Route to CISO podcast audience. Tell us a bit about how you started your career, what you were doing sort of pre-cyber, and how you got into cyber.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting perspective. The short version is I'm prior military, right? And I think there are a ton of prior military in the security space. But I was a pilot, right? So I'm flying airplanes. What do you do after that? And I made the transition as a consultant, which was a great role to get exposure to the corporate world and things, and I followed a friend to GE, and when I was there, I was pretty new, and the CIO got an invitation from the Air Force for a meeting down in San Antonio, and so they basically looked at me and like, hey, new guy, you were in the Air Force, you don't have much work to do, why don't you go to this meeting? And it just so happened it was the Air Force cyber folks talking about this thing that was out there that no one knew about at the time. This is 2007, so it was, before it became public, but this thing called the Advanced Persistent Threat. And Greg Rattray was leading that. He had been one of my instructors at the Air Force Academy. So I knew Greg, I knew the organization and some of that. I still had an active security clearance. So it just worked out really well. And, I remember I called my boss at the time after the meeting because I was in IT, right? I was a project program manager working within IT, and I called my boss and told him what it was about. And, it's this security thing. And I remember he's like, "Oh, you don't want anything to do with that. You're just going to get sideways with the CIO, the CTO. Just come back and let's go back to your project management work." And I didn't listen to him, right? I ignored the advice, and I've been in cybersecurity ever since, and it's great. It's been a great career.
And so like as you've sort of grown through that, sort of getting into cybersecurity and despite not getting warned off it, right, or being warned off it,
Right.
and still working through it, what like what have been some of the sort of interesting challenges you've had, and have there been parts that have really put, where you've actually reconsidered, like, what am I doing here? Do I really want to be in cyber?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think every CISO, every time you have an incident that you're working, right? You're like, what am I doing here? And why do I want to be doing this? Let me go to something else. But the reality is, even that, right? It's a little bit like professional sports. You think about you practice. Well, game time is when you're in the game and having fun. And so I think for a lot of us, it's the same thing. That's game time. I've really, really enjoyed it. Some of the exciting, I mean, the nation state stuff is certainly really, really interesting. Having worked incidents where you're on keyboard at about the exact same time as the attacker being on keyboard, and that live fight and what you're doing, I think is really, really interesting. It's just, there's a lot of experiences like that. And then I think just in general, what's really rewarding to me, it's so hard when you're in it, but at the end of the year, if you think every year after you do your goal setting and you perform, looking back and seeing what you've done and what you've delivered that year, like, you can really see progress within security. And one thing in particular that I've really enjoyed is the build aspect. Security's been such a growth field that when we built out the first program, the first time I did this, you build the team from the ground up, you hire your own team. Everybody, told me, enjoy it. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. You never get to do that. And I'm on, my fourth, maybe fifth build. And so it's so much fun to do the builds and to see a program mature.
Now, look, you're a person that's, I mean, flown aircraft. So how does that even compare? Because I can only imagine so like, short story, probably long. When I was studying at school, I studied math, physics, and chemistry, and I actually wanted to be a pilot. But I never followed through with that, and I got into sales. That never was my career path. But I can only imagine the buzz of flying an aircraft, especially in for the Air Force, right? We're not talking about commercial, we're talking Air Force. How does that even compare?
Yeah, it's all personal satisfaction, right? Like you're right. You're not pulling G's. Like, thinking back to pilot training and pulling G's and your hair's on fire. That was when I had hair. That it was great. But and I have combat time, combat support time. But I did I flew heavies, so I flew big airplanes and I always wanted to be an airline pilot, but what they don't tell you is you're just a fancy bus driver. At that point, it's not as complicated as they make you think, right? And I think coming in and being a business leader, and we'll probably talk about that later. Like, for me, it's less about like the technology and solving a technology problem and some of that, but like being a business leader and helping solve business problems and drive a business forward, making revenue, being successful. And the most important piece is the people side. And so, I love working with people. I love mentoring and helping to develop, watching people grow, watching myself grow, and it's really rewarding.
Did you like so you sort of obviously that I mean I've led teams and stuff, and I can wholeheartedly agree with you in that aspect. And I look back and actually I was down the gym, and I got a random text from somebody that worked for me 5 years ago, and I introduced them into cybersecurity recruitment and trained them from scratch. They had no experience in there, straight out of school, and he was working for one of the FANGs as a recruiter, and just texted me out the blue and said, Kris, I don't know if I ever was appreciative at the time, and it was so nice to hear that. It's so nice to hear that you've had an impact and that you are leaving a bit of a legacy.
Yeah.
And what are the things that you're kind of most proud of, and the legacies, I guess, that you've left when you look back?
Yeah. I think it's easy to look at the programs and you see the programs and that never, but everybody, so a successor comes in, they put their spin on it. And so, I love that I leave that behind. But for me, it really is the people that I've worked with. And I've been fortunate, whether it's my peers, my bosses, to just work with great people. I've hired people that are, smarter and better than myself. And I think maybe one of the times when I was proudest, I sat down at the computer at LinkedIn and started going through my connections to see who was in a, I'll say CISO role, but it's not even necessarily like who's a CISO. It's, who's been successful in their career that has worked for me. And so I was kind of, it was let me tick the box to see how many CISOs I've helped grow, right?
Right.
And I gave up. Like there were so many, there was so many people that it wasn't worth trying to count. And I taught them things to do and things not to do, right? We've all got our strengths and our development areas, and so they learn from me both good and bad. But I think, and we learn from each other. But I think looking at that, it's just really proud of the teams I've been a part of and what I've been able to contribute there.
Love that. Yeah, I love that. I definitely think, I mean, the whole thing about work, I think it is the people that really make the difference. You can enjoy what you do for work, but whether it's coming into the office or working with them remotely, or having those interactions, and then sometimes if you're working remotely, getting to see them face to face, going to an event or a conference or a Christmas party or whatever it might be, holiday party, right? So I love that. Now, bringing people through, that's one of the biggest challenges I think right now in the market is like the challenge of getting into a position to get your first cybersecurity role. And with you, obviously, you were working in one area, and then you moved into sort of that program management, and then into cyber from that way. And I think there is a lot of people out there that are studying cyber and think that their first job is gonna be a cyber role, and actually I think we'll find as we interview more and more CISOs, and I speak as I already know from 12 years of just doing cybersecurity recruitment, there's very few people that go straight from college or straight into their very first cybersecurity role. What do you think some of the challenges are were for people getting in previously, and what they are now? What do you see that they are now?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge now is that you see these entry level roles that are posted, but they want experience on the entry level roles. So I think we as leaders, the people that are running security programs have to really be willing to build that pipeline and to grow and develop people from an entry level. So I think that's a challenge for everybody. What I would say is you can kind of come from anywhere, and I've seen it. And so consulting is a great gig to go to. So managed services, or go do the detection stuff at an MSSP and get some of that experience and consulting. So like if you think MSSP or consulting or that, what's great is you see across companies, you see across industries, you just get this great kind of global, if you will, view of the world. Certainly if you can get to a company and develop and roll within a company, that's great too. But be willing to. I've seen pilot, police officers, fraud, operations, right? I've done roles where we've had call centers, watching people come from call center and doing, an hourly call center role to like the fraud team to, the fraud and cyber team and physical security, moving across. There are a lot of different ways to kind of break those barriers.
Yeah, 100%. I like that, and we'll talk about attributes a bit later on because you were kind enough to give me your attributes for the stuff that I'm collecting, the projects I'm collecting them for at the moment. But I definitely think there are a lot of people that are already building those attributes in other careers, in other positions that can 100% transport them across with hopefully very little need for a lot of change and a lot of growth. They're really just coming across, and if you can find the right person that's already got those skill sets or the attributes and personality that fit right, then they'll probably pick up the rest quite quickly. So I think challenges of getting into what we do is an issue, and you agree with me there. Then I see a lot of people, the challenge with it then is getting into leadership, right? Getting that hop up from being an individual contributor to a leader. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, so for me, I you I got lucky, right? It's just it's timing, luck, and performance kind of all rolling together, right? It's all about being the right person at the right time. And in my case, as we started to look at APT and how are we going to solve this problem, one of the things we did was look at the organizational piece of, okay, what do we need to do to solve that organizationally, and drew an organization on the whiteboard, and I just raised my hand and said, hey, I'll do that, right? And so I got it. And so I think it's a couple of things. First, you own your own development, right? You own your own growth. And so take ownership in that, be deliberate, work with it, have mentors to help you get there, and look for opportunities, and be willing to take the job that nobody else will take something, that's an adjacency or whatnot. It was certainly an adjacency for me, and then surround yourself with smart people. And I think most importantly is just be patient. I've seen so many people. I was in the Air Force, right? I was in the Air Force. I was an officer, an academy grad. You know, leading a crew in an airplane during wartime, and went to be a consultant as an individual contributor. Then I led some projects where and then my first role out of that, I was an individual contributor. So you're really mid-career, and I'm a mid-career individual contributor. But I learned so much, I grew so much, and just be patient, wait for that right opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, a few things you said there kind of just reminded me when I was working. I worked for a big recruitment company, tech recruitment company for a long time, and they had this sort of act as if, and if you act like a leader, and that act like a leader is being the person that people turn to when they want advice, right? You've all, and I say this even to people that are early industry. In fact, I've got four people that have spoken for the last 2 years running InfoSec World with me. We do this panel, and they were in their very first cybersecurity job, and they come and did a panel, and so they're like, what? Every other speaker has been in security for years and years, and then there's these four people who are amazing. Big shout out to them that they're in their very first, very first cybersecurity career. And I said we should do a panel because there are people trying to get to that stage. And it was amazing. And they just, they got up there, they did amazingly well. And it just, sometimes you have to push yourself and put yourself in a position, and you don't realize you can be a leader, without having that title from any stage in your career.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things when people ask me about my leadership style, right? You're like, how do you describe that? But I talk a lot about like more my strategy, and one of those strategies is like setting an empowerment culture. And I think so many people miss that. It's like, just assume you're empowered, right? Assume you're empowered, take it. I would much rather be leaning forward and going too far and get in trouble for that. Like I assumed authority that I didn't have than the other way around. And as a leader or manager of people, I would love to come and tell you, hey, you're pushing a little too hard. You're going a little too far. Like that's exactly the kind of person you want on the team. And so to your point, just take it, right?
Yeah, I think you look at sports teams, and my favorite podcast right now is an ex-English footballer, soccer player, of course, I should say. All my English friends will kill me for saying that. All my American friends will kill me for calling him a football player. So I can't win. But yeah, he played for the team that I support, and it's a really interesting podcast. And you look at soccer teams and sports teams generally, and although the manager picks who the captain of the team is, really the players have already decided. There's always people in that team that are just the leaders of the team. And then when the manager's picking, they're probably picking out of three of a team of 25, right? Because there's already those people like standing up. And I think that's for anybody that wants to be that individual contributor, it's sort of do that, make yourself the obvious choice for the manager, or CISO or whoever it is that's making that decision. Make yourself the obvious choice, and then ultimately, if you don't get it where you are, then yes, there's a time that you might need to move on and look for it somewhere else. But do what you can anyway.
I agree, and again, that's the timing piece and the right opportunity. There are some, I've been at very, very large companies. I've been at smaller companies, and it's different, right? Because it really is about that opportunities. And sometimes, and look, if you're the right leader, and if you have the right leader, like sometimes someone exiting is the right move. And so helping that person grow into a role somewhere else, take a leadership role somewhere else, I think is something we all need to be willing to do, and something that you've got to think about if you're that person. Don't leave for the wrong reasons, but if you're leaving for the right role, it makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a good. We'll go into attributes a bit later, but I think sometimes the attribute of a good leader is, sometimes people outgrow an organization, right? And you can't offer them what they really need. And I think trying to keep hold of those people, even though, of course, it's better for you, it's better for your role if you can keep them in the business. If it's not better for them, sometimes you're better letting them go, because they may well come back, or there'll be other opportunities that could come from doing that. And I think that's that whole like sort of making sure you're not selfish at times when when it is in your own self-interest to keep somebody. I look at sometimes my business is a small boutique business, and there are times when they need to go out and work for a FANG, right? And discover whether that's right for them, or go and be the chief recruiter at a company direct, and I don't sit back. Sometimes I feel that, I've trained them, I've got them here, and I really could do with them staying for another couple of years. But if that's what they really want to do, and you're not going to be able to keep somebody, you don't want somebody in your business that doesn't really want to be there, or is there out of the feeling that they just don't want to let you down. They need to look after their own responsibilities. And so, yeah, I think that's a good leadership trait. So how did you end up getting your first CISO gig? Because there's so many, the step up to every challenge throughout this whole sort of cycle of working in our industry. The challenge of getting into it's tough. The challenge of getting your first, moving from an individual contributor to a leader, and then there's even less people that get to make it to that CISO position. So how did that happen for you?
It's odd. I was thinking about this, and I laughed a little, because I was like, have I ever actually had a CISO title? And so it took me a while to figure it out. I would say, when I was at GE, we had a CISO council, and I
Mm-hmm.
was fortunate that while I didn't have a CISO title, I was helping, to lead that, and to get all the CISOs working together. And so some experience there, again, without the title. And then I took the CSO. Actually, the first time I had the title was the CSO role at Barclays. I went into Barclays as the CSO of the Americas, and shortly after I got there, a friend of mine who was there in the CISO or the CISO of Barclays International resigned, and so I was acting. So it was more, and again, it was through my network. It was just the next role and some of that. And I think, and I'm really torn because we worry a lot about the title, and don't worry about the title, right? So we really should not worry about titles, but at the same time, you see this a lot, and I'm sure you see it a ton as a recruiter. There are so many companies that are out there that like, we want to hire a CISO, but they have to be, a sitting, they need to have experience and be a sitting CISO, and they won't look at like an equivalent experience without the title or something. So, I would say don't worry about the title, but again, actively manage your development, actively manage your experience, and keep in mind, same, one of the things I tell a lot of my team is, I don't care what you put on LinkedIn, right? Like we get so wrapped around what a corporate title is sometimes, and there's some very specific, like some companies won't call you a chief, right? So they're not going to have a CISO, but you're a CISO. And so, LinkedIn can be CISO even if the approved HR version isn't.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and I see that an awful lot. There's a awful lot of companies that have heads of security, heads of information security, that sort of role, and never give them the official
It's very
CISO
very British,
title.
by the way.
Yes, it is very British.
Head of is very British.
Yeah, and I think titles generally, in cybersecurity as a whole, titles are very misleading. And you can be look at me, I'm a CEO. Would you go and get me? Would I go and get a job as CEO of Coca-Cola tomorrow? No, because what I do for my small business is not the same as what a CEO of that business does, and so they can be not just misleading, but it's just a different job, right?
And I think that's really important for people in our industry to think about the role in terms of influence and experience and development, right? So think about it from that learning and growth perspective personally, as well as what you contribute as much as the title. So because, there are CISO roles that have, 0 or 3 direct reports. There are some with 3,000, and the compensation goes from all over the place, right? And so I think that's also an important thing to keep in mind as you're looking at roles and opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. And I see there's always often that argument between like virtual CISOs or fractional CISOs, and the differences, of being a CISO at a startup compared to a CISO of a large public company or an enterprise company. There's just every company needs something different, and so this route to CISO that we talk about could be a route to a completely different job for one person to somebody else.
Yeah, and I think don't let that title or scope, right? Like, don't let that hold you back. And like I'm looking at now where I'm like, what's next, right? What's next for me? There's some startup roles that are really exciting, right? They're you're really going to see the influence on it. And if I look at the math that I did when I left Barclays and went to Health Equity, I had a 500 person team at Barclays, and there were like little over 10 of us when I got at Health Equity. So anyone looking at it in that view would say, well, no, like, why would I take that, bigger company, bigger role, more direct reports. But if I look at it personally from what I learned, the impact that I had, how rewarding it was, it was a great move. And so you've got to look at that, very, very selfishly, and not just what seems to make sense on paper.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And so you were CSO first before being acting CISO. That's a really unusual way round, right? Usually, if you see a CISO, then eventually they take on maybe the physical side and become the CSO. So how did that work?
Yeah, it was really just my first CISO role, right? I think I'm very passionate about the converged security, especially like if you think financial or health sector that I've been in. I think, physical and cyber and fraud and like bringing all of those things together when you think about incidents, whether it's a personnel, an HR thing you're investigating, or some physical security thing, like everything involves a person and a computer.
Hmm.
And so the just the natural connection there, I think, is really worthwhile. And I think being former military, you're at a bit. There's a lot of former military and law enforcement. You're at a bit of an advantage there because you think like bad guys. You think like attackers, and you've always been mindful of physical and cyber and all of that together, technology together. So it really fits naturally.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I agree with you. I went. I think it was last week. I went to the ISC West conference that's here. It's the first time I've ever been to it, and I knew somebody that was speaking there, and had somebody else was here for Google Next, and they said they were going to pop along there. So I was like, okay, I'll come meet up with you, and went up there and walked around the expo, and it was really interesting because to see all of the convergence of physical and cyber together. Everybody had screens that were showing, things that were going on at cameras and that were picking up certain details, and obviously even the physical barriers like the doors and stuff like that. Most of them are all, they're connected and in the cyber world. So yeah, it was interesting to see how much cyber there was really there, even though actually the conference, there didn't seem to, wasn't much of a discussion around cyber. It felt more physical, very different from most of the other conferences I go to.
Yeah, we're still. It's frustrating for me that we're still very stovepiped. I think I would have expected by now the convergence to happen, a little bit more aggressively, more broadly, and it's still very stovepiped. But I do hope that that's the way that it goes going forward.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for it to happen that way. We'll see how it develops. I was surprised, and the conversation I had with my friend there, he was like, "Oh, I go to this one all the time," and I said, "It doesn't feel like a cyber conference," and he is a cyber person, and he said, yeah, I just like the convergence is so important. I've been pushing it for years here, but it's still sort of a very small part of the conference, or it feels still a very small part. Nobody's working that well together, so who knows? Maybe we'll see more of that. Maybe that's a niche for some people to get into. The AI
Yeah,
won't replace us all, of course, right?
that's right.
So, what do you think the challenge is? Like, you got that opportunity to move up to CISO. Like, what do you see the challenges, like the other people that are out there right now and struggling to get that next step? And there's a lot of them, right? I get contacted all the time by directors that are like, look, my next step is a CISO position, and it is tough. I know somebody that has now most recently been a CISO twice over, really big companies, very impressive. People know who he is. A few years back, we had a retained search and we were trying to fill a CISO position, and somebody recommended him, and he's been in cybersecurity a long time, including building his own company and it being acquired and stuff. And so I put him forward alongside a couple of other people, and they in the end sort of were dismissed him because he hadn't been a CISO before, right? Which is exactly what you were talking about. And then since then he's gone on to be a CISO and a very prominent CISO at some really well-known companies. And so it's interesting, people do get overlooked because of their titles. It is a challenge. Like, have you got any tips or any advice for people that are trying to make that jump?
Yeah, and look at it. I could even give you personal examples,
Mm.
both in my past and even today. But I think, well, what I would want to do is, when you edit this, replay the last part, right? And he has since gone on to these, right? And I think that's so the advice is just like we all want to plan our career, right? And you plan this ladder that you're going to climb and each step and each rung. And when you're not seeing that, it feels frustrating. And you can imagine if I went back to 22-year-old me and said, here's where I'm going to be, today in 2024, there was no path to get here, none, right? And so just no way, and I wouldn't have believed it. And so I think for some of that, don't just wait for the right opportunity, right? So the reality is this person was the right person, that was the wrong role. and they've now found the right roles. So that's one. Now, easy for me to say, to somebody who, it's if you're not the person in it, it doesn't feel so good when you're the person hearing that.
Yeah.
So the other thing I would say is, again, there's a lot of different roles that are out there. So think about the type of role. Do you want a startup role or an enterprise role or whatnot? And I honestly think the most underrated roles are the BISO, the BISO roles, and the number 2 roles, the deputy roles that are out there. I think going in and being a deputy, so especially at a larger enterprise, gives you just some great experience. And the same thing on the BISO side. Like, go and get this experience with your peers. And what you'll see happen is, as you're doing that, the best way to get a job is not to throw the resume out there and hope it sticks, right? It's to have somebody pull you, and you'll see it'll develop that network and develop those connections. Someone will recommend you, or you'll get pulled, into that right role going forward.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So I would
go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I would say, like for me, it was like being patient, right? Like it was patience. Now, I wasn't patient at the time at all. You're really, really frustrated. But now it's like, wow, like that really worked out. Why didn't I just wait for it?
Yeah, that's because, like, as you're saying that, I'm sitting here thinking, over 12 years, we've had more CISO positions than we have BISO, deputy CISO, sort of added together. And if you think about that, and I think about some of my friends that I know that are deputy CISOs, they've been taken along usually by a CISO or somebody they've worked for before, or somebody they know. They've kind of networked their way into that opportunity. And I think that once you're in as certainly as a deputy CISO, if you're working for the right person, and it's somebody often that they've got sort of a time limit, right? They want to do this position, especially at a big enterprise, right? Usually they want to do it for a certain amount of years, and typically they're in a position where financially they can do that, right? They do it for 3-5 years and then they're done. And if you're their deputy, the business, it's a no-brainer that you'll be the next person to step up into that. And even, that should be a conversation you're having. Right. Is this my job? Am I ready? What do I need to learn? And to the point where, hopefully you are stepping up into that next one. And you can do really, I know deputy CISOs that are getting paid 7 figures. So there's some very well paid deputy CISO and BISO jobs as well.
Yep. And you won't have your name in the defendant's side of the case either in that role, right?
Right. Yeah. Good point. I think that's another one. Actually, that's quite an interesting as well, because you see there's so much. Obviously, there's a lot of that at the moment, and a lot of CISOs being held. How does that impact sort of the CISO community, or somebody like yourself in that sort of leadership position? Like, does it bring extra concerns? Do you end up having to ask more questions when you're getting jobs? How does that affect you?
It's hard for me to talk to it because, really, as I had that title pretty early on, I was fortunate. I was a corporate officer. And so, first of all, you're on the D&O insurance already. And secondly, you're going to jail already, right? Like it's you're already held to that standard.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, now, do I think everything that's happening is fair to, no, right? I think we need to get to a normalcy like you are with Sarbanes-Oxley or something like that, if you think about SOX. But, for me, so many of us talk about wanting a seat at the table, and we want all the positive stuff from the seat at the table. We just, we want people to listen. There's a responsibility and an accountability that comes with that. And if you want the seat at the table, you have to take all of that. And so I think that's the piece we all have to get used to. It's not just the general counsel who determines materiality and whether or not to report something, right? It's on us to make sure that we're doing this right. And so to me, it's more about the elevation of the role and all of us that are in it, or trying to achieve it, and making sure that we're ready for that.
Right. Have you and you can say no, or we can totally edit this bit out, but have you ever been in a situation right where you're like, you felt like you're under pressure to do something that you wouldn't like, you think you shouldn't be doing it one way, but you're clearly under pressure to do it in that. And then how do you deal with something like that if you have been?
Yeah, I mean, the real answer is no. Not again, my personal materiality, right? Like,
Right.
look, we are always weighing. Like, this is where I actually go back to my flying days. The airplane's behind me, right? As I talk about security, to me, like, security is not a 1 and a 0. Like, there's so many people that look at it as you're secure or you're not, right? It's risk management. We are risk leaders, and so if you think about, like, are there things that you get uncomfortable with? Yes, but it's about risk management. So, if you don't want to crash an airplane, you park it in the hangar and you don't take it out, and you're fine. But the mission doesn't get done, right? You don't,
Right.
the business doesn't happen, you're not making money, etc. And so it's the same thing. Like, if you're thinking as a risk leader, like, have I been unhappy with decisions? Absolutely. Have I disagreed with some decisions? Sure. Have I ever been, at a point where if there's a right or a wrong, or it's really truly material to me? No. And if you are, right, this is where you have to have the the internal, personal compass,
Yeah.
and the just
So the ethics,
be
really,
willing to, and just be willing to say no, and to to, you may have to resign, right? You may have to leave a job, you may have to, like, who knows what but you have to be just willing to take on the ramifications, of that decision.
Yeah, yeah. Standing up for what's right,
Yeah.
and doing something that you can live with, it means a lot, right? For most people, like, for me, I I have to do things that allow me to sleep at night, I guess, is the thing, right? So, and even like, when you own your own business, there are things I've done that I look back and I question. I don't question whether I did the right thing by not doing them, but I
Mm.
do question whether you get rewarded or not when I look at the bank balance from not doing them, right? And then I look at people that have said yes to stuff, and they're doing very, very well out of it, when I know morally what they're doing isn't quite right. It's very difficult. It's quite difficult to see that, right?
Yeah, and look, I think there's two versions of this. There's the moral and ethical piece, and look, you got to do the right thing, right? Do the moral, the ethical thing. There's everything else, and the everything else is tough. And this is where what I would say is, what I try to do myself, and anytime someone on my team comes to me, right, it's like, we're doing the wrong thing here, or this person won't listen to me, or this is the wrong decision. We all want to look at that, as a window, not as a mirror, right? And I think
Right.
if instead, and that's what I'll tell a direct who comes to me. It's like, well, they won't listen. Well, why not, right? Or, same thing for me. If the C-suite is making a decision that I don't agree with, then clearly I have not influenced that decision effectively. And so, is it my communication? Is it my data? Am I wrong? So go back and look at yourself, and change that piece too. I think more than just running from the problem, right?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I think, like, taking a view, like, it's the almost like that perspective, like seeing things from different perspectives, right? If you can put yourself to into their shoes, but then also put yourself into a third party and kind of look at it from all of the different views. And sometimes you realize by doing that that there's something you missed, right? And there's a reason why they're saying no. And actually, it's quite a simple thing to maybe get them to say yes. It's just a
Right.
communication issue, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, I like that. I think I was speaking to somebody else, like at one of these conferences on the panels, and they raised something, and it's been sort of digging in my mind, because I speak to a lot of candidates, and some candidates have been laid off. Some of them are like weighing up, do I have to take a backward step here? I'm in a really good position, it's really hard for me. Sometimes it's a backward step in salary, sometimes a backward step, or what appears to be a backward step. But I know so many people that have had to do that and then rebounded much further by doing so. And I don't know whether I'm going to ask you, it might not be something that you've experienced, but have you ever had sort of that challenge or like a major turning point where it's felt like a sideways or a backward step, or you've had to do something where you're like, this doesn't feel like I'm moving forwards, but it's been, it's worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Just throughout our career, right? I think lots of us, because again, it's we think of the ladder and climbing versus the experiences, what you learn, how you grow, and that. And so, the earlier conversation, I was in the Air Force. I was an officer, so you're a leader. You're a leader of leaders, at that point. And I came out, and I'm an individual contributor in consulting. I'm an individual contributor to a large company, and GE was really funny. They've got Crotonville. They had Crotonville for just this personal development that you do, and they're like, "Hey, congratulations, you were selected for new managers development course." Right? And I was like, "Are you kidding me? I'm mid-career. I've been managing and leading people for 15 years, but man, I learned so much." And so I think it's just much more about us in those scenarios where, yeah, I've had a lot of those where it didn't feel like a step up, but the learnings that you have, the experience that you have, I mean, I wouldn't change a thing with any of those. And so it's one of those where I think you keep your head down and you keep moving. And again, like I said earlier on your progress, look back a year later, or 2 years later, or 3 years later. That's when all of a sudden you're like, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And the number of people I've seen that have been laid off or like to find themselves in a situation they just don't, they don't like, and it's been one of the toughest times they've had to go through. And then I see them sort of 2 or 3 years or bump into them and they're like, oh, this happened and that happened, and this is now, and they're almost like that different person. And you try your best to I mean, all you can do is really merely listen to people, right? And try and convince them that, trust me, if I look at things that have happened to me and the challenges that I've seen, and then where it's ended up, it's been a real positive thing. But you've got to try and believe in that when you're going through it. That's the toughest part.
Yeah. And it's hard when you're going through it, right? And I think we're not great at supporting each other through that. And so I think that's something that we all could do is, when there are people in that situation, reach out more often, ask, check on how they're really doing. And more importantly, activate the network, like really help out, because, they're going to repay you someday, right? That karma will come back. And I think that makes it a lot easier on the folks going through that, because you feel the support, you see the potential. It's when you don't see the potential in the way out that it's really, really overwhelming.
Yeah, 100%. That whole talking to people brings up like, and I think it's like International like Stress Abatement Month or something. I don't know what it is, but I know there's something. I've got some podcasts planned, but there's something this month. Now, by the time we release this, we're going to wait till after RSA so we don't spoil people getting to know you at the actual conference and the panel. But is there anything that you found really worked for you? Because that's being the CISO, being a leader anyway, and being in our industry, whether you're an individual contributor, leader, whatever it is there's so many stressful parts, especially when there's incidents going on and stuff like that. Is there anything you found that has really worked for you in terms of dealing with that stress?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I should have a good answer to it, but I'm one of the people, like, I struggle with this, right? I'm just terrible at it, because what I've told myself, from a long time ago is, I'm kind of feeding on it and I'm thriving in it and I thrive in these environments. But it's like so many of us that are, a certain personality type or whatnot, like we're just not willing to think about things in terms of mental health and that. And, I'll actually say, I don't have work-life balance. That's terrible. Like that's, and I think Americans in particular, you wear it with a badge of honor, and we shouldn't. And so I wish I knew. I would say, the vacation time and the time, with family and some of that is really, really valuable. I love it. we all got to do a better job of unplugging while we're doing it. And and some of us just, I'll stress more. Like that's the problem. When you go on vacation, I'll stress more if I'm not looking at the phone than I do if I'm actually doing some work. And so, we have to find what works for us, but it also needs to be what's healthy for us. And so I think, really working through that, and for a lot of us, it's finding somebody that's a different personality type, whether it's a friend completely, in industry, a friend completely out of it, a family member or something, and really being willing to like use them as that balance mentor, or for crying out loud, a therapist. We really all should have them. We should be okay with that, and we've put the stigma on it where it's not okay, and we should. It really helps us to reflect and grow as well as a individual.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny coming from the UK. Actually, the whole therapist thing is it's almost a bit of an like a joke about Americans having therapy in the UK, and then coming here
Right.
and actually seeing it and realizing it. And also, I guess, for somebody like myself, come away from a country where all my friends live and all my family are, and you don't want to put that stress on your family and friends that are miles away, that feel like they can't do anything for you, right? Because they want you to be happy. You've moved abroad, and so yeah, it was really for me like very interesting to deal with the stress and eventually like find a therapist and have those sort of conversations. For somebody that is probably similar to you, I quite thrive on it, and I get stressed when I'm not on my phone checking stuff. And I think if I can look back, I'm a huge scuba diver, and I like to dive with sharks, and that's my thing. It's been my thing for years. Less so now I have a 4-year-old. I don't get to travel away to these places and do that. But I think the one time I truly unplugged is I went away on a boat for 10 days, and a half a day into it, you leave land and then you live on the boat. So after half a day, I had no cell signal, and it took me probably another 24 hours of being like, oh, what could be happening? I was running a business, right? What could be happening with my business? I had good people here I could rely on, and I hoped I did. But also, I was just like, I need to just do this. It's a once in a lifetime chance. And I came back,
Yeah.
and you know what? The world didn't burn down, right? The business was still running. Nothing terrible happened, and that helped me see a little bit that if you can find the right people to rely on, you can unplug a little bit more. Now, running your own business, I feel like you don't ever get to completely do that, but at least an element. And I imagine even as CISO, it's probably tough to completely get away, from a potential phone call.
Yeah, we have this control, these control issues, right? Where like I said earlier, I've always had great teams around me. Like rely on the team to do that. And I think that's probably where a lot of us could learn is rely on the team, right? Force the number 2, the number 3, the number 4 to step up, and force your boss to make that happen, right? And I think that would help all of us a lot. And I was fortunate in my last role. My boss was great at that. He wouldn't call me if I was on time off. He would call, who's the acting. And the other thing, a lot of us live and die by the calendar that are this personality type, and so be deliberate in that. And similar to, we can get very mired in the tactical if we don't set aside that time to be strategic. That's a development area for all of us as we want to become more executive. Same thing here. You got to block the time to be strategic. You got to block the time for balance as well, and don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah, 100%. And even that sort of building the succession, if you don't give them a chance to act as a leader while you're out, they're probably going to leave and look for that somewhere else as well, right? Because that's what, they're there as your number 2 to be able to step up and to do that stuff. You never give them the opportunity to do it, try and control everything, then that's probably not going to work out very well for you or them long term. So
Exactly.
yeah, now you talked about sort of your old boss being really great. I'm conscious we haven't got that much time, so I'll like, I don't want to hold you. I don't know whether have you got a hard stop at.
No, I'm good. Well, you can just
You good? All
edit
right.
all
So
of
if we
this.
go a little bit over, then we're okay. Okay, that's
Yeah.
good. Because I'm enjoying this. This is a very easy chat, right? An hour's swinging by super quickly. But you were saying about your boss being really good, sort of going to your number 2 and knowing that you've got time off. On that note, has there been sort of CISOs or leaders or people that you've worked with like previously that like either you want to give a shout out to, or people that made a real difference to you that have impacted how you manage, you've learned off, those sort of things, people that you look up to, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are so many. We could do another hour just on this, right? And I wouldn't limit it to CISOs. I think people that I've have been peers with and people who've worked for me. I mean, it's just an immense amount of learning. What I would say is, if you're looking to, what's the kind of CISO you want to be? Yeah, some names pop to mind. I haven't talked to them to say, hey, but I think it'd be okay because this is a very, very positive thing,
Yeah.
right? But so who should we model ourselves after? One of them that really comes to mind is Phil Venables, and Phil was at Goldman, he's at Google now, and I think he's just a phenomenal leader, and so that and he's a risk leader, right? He was risk, he's been on boards and that, and so just a great person to look at and try to emulate, and one that I've worked with and turned to for help at times. Gary McCallum is another one. I was on a board with Gary. He was the CSO at USAA, and then we ended up sharing, like, his CEO was my board member, and so we've got some connectivity that way. But just and I think for him, again, it's like, what kind of a leader do I want to be? You're looking at just that executive presence that they have, and just the way they communicate, the way they carry themselves. It's different, and you can notice that on those that are really good. And I could give you a bunch more, but one more that I would mention, because I think we don't have enough diverse role models in security. We're getting there, right? We're finally really paying attention to this, and we so many times think about diversity in terms of a number, and that's not what it is at all. Like, people with different backgrounds and different experiences and different perspectives, all of that's diversity, right? It's not just race, religion, etc. And just the value you bring, like, there's data, empirical data that shows companies perform better. But Deneen DeFiore, who's at United now, Deneen, and she's a local Cincinnati person. I'm in Ohio. Just really always just impressed with her, and again, the way she carries herself, her presence, her just expertise, the ability to be, and this is something a lot of us have to do and really struggle with, is how can you be technical and understand the technical side, but sit with the C-suite, sit with the board, sit on a board, and be that type of an executive leader, and she's managed to balance that, which I think is really impressive.
Yeah, I love that. Obviously, I think Dina and I've spoke to before. She's wonderful, and I was trying to get her on a panel, on one of the panels, but I mean, she travels. Obviously, she works for United, right? But she travels, so trying to catch her at a time where I could get her on a panel. We tried a few times, just could never get the dates to work. Maybe I can get on a podcast a bit easier. So I'll have to make sure that I drop her a message.
Absolutely.
And see if I can get her on here, as well as Gary and Phil, of course, as well. I know a couple of the other CISOs at the different sort of Google sort of spin-off companies over there, and one of them actually is a really, really good friend of mine, and he was the first president of the Cloud Security Alliance chapter in SoCal, and I was one of the first board members when we put the first board together to become a chapter. So I've known him and his wife for years. So I know I'll definitely get him on here for sure. But we should get Phil and Gary on as well. And I'll bug Dean and see if we can get her at least on one of these podcasts. I actually said, I've had a couple of people come back to me. I would love to do it. I'm a bit worried about whether my company would agree. But I think, like, it's not really, as you can see, we've not really talked about what specific companies are doing. There's nothing here that I think would impact that. So I'm hoping that we don't have too many companies that just don't want their CISO talking about this stuff. But yeah, let's see. Hopefully we can get a few more of these on here. That would be amazing. So
absolutely.
Obviously you mentioned 3 people, and I asked you before, and I know you sent me them previously, but I've gone out. So I don't know whether you know this or not, but the three attributes question, which I asked you, and I've gone out to like 500 different, over 500 different CISOs and asked them the same question. Not all of them have answered, but I will say I've got over 200 people that have come back to me and told me their top three attributes, which is amazing. And I'm going to pull that all together and do something with that data. But I would love to know, like, especially, you've got those three people there. What are the three attributes that you think a CISO needs to have to be successful?
Yeah, it's funny. So as I was preparing for this, I'm like, man, I gave him three, but I didn't want to cheat and look back. And so
it doesn't matter. They can be a different three, whatever you're feeling right now.
Exactly. Every time I answer, it's a different three. But as I was thinking about this, like for me, if you think about a successful CISO and what we want to develop, and you think about where we really want this to go, where it is a C-level executive, where you have a seat at the table, where we are business leaders sitting on boards to be able to represent risk and technology and security, but we're business leaders. I kind of rolled it all into one, right? Which is executive leadership, right? I think we all need the attribute we all need to develop is executive leadership, and we're all somewhere on the path to doing that at different places. And I think as you think about executive leadership, like what's different from the traditional CISO role, right? And I think one is like an executive people leadership view, and where it really truly, like, you're not looking at position power, you're not like, it's about influence, it's about servant leadership and development and growth of a team, organizational design, organizational success, the strategic piece that you do with people, and then thinking about, I've mentioned risk a couple times, right? It's not thinking security in terms of security, it's thinking about security in terms of risk, the risk appetite of the company, understanding what that risk appetite is, being able to influence and align on the risk position and posture of a company with the risk appetite, etc. And then that business perspective of be a business leader. And so again, you're an executive leader that's part of the C-suite who's moving the company forward. Your job, your technical role is to manage that security risk, with the rest of the leadership team to represent that, but you're helping to lead the company. That's really, like, those are the attributes that that is the attribute really that we need to develop.
Yeah, I love that. I think if I look, like, business has been one of the most common ones that I've seen come up. And I think the earlier, especially if I look at people whose careers have moved up very quickly, they've understood really early in their career how important it is that business works, right? That everything you do, everything you ask to change, everything you want to secure is within mind of how the business works. What actually brings in the profit, how are you helping that happen rather than stopping it from happening? So yeah, I feel like that business part, and certainly all three of those are in the top 10, I can tell you that. I think that ability to lead, and understand risk is like a core part. There is, like, a lot of people say you don't have to be super technical to be a CISO. And I think an understanding of risk isn't the same as being technical, but I actually think that when you go out and you speak to most people, there's also an element of understanding that technology and how it works, and whether that's technological risk or whatever it might be. There's an element of all those things. So that's interesting. They're an interesting three.
I hope they align with everyone else's, but yeah, I mean, again, you got to take the airplane out of the hangar. You got to fly it. You got to fly it safely. And my team knows on the business side in particular, I'm really passionate there. Anyone who's worked for me, like, pet peeve is to say the business. You'll never hear me as the security leader, or if you do, you'll hear me correct myself, talk about, like, well, the business needs this, or the business. No. We are all part of the business, right? And similar to the military and executing war. I was flying an airplane. Now I was flying the tanker or the cargo thing, right? But like, the maintenance people were just as important, the fuels people were just as important, the personnel people and the finance folks, right? The entire team, the entire company is the business, and we're all part of that. We have to think like that, I think.
Yeah, 100%. You know, if the business isn't succeeding, then you're going to be out of a job, right? So
Right.
even if you're doing a great
Right.
job keeping them secure, if they're not profitable and not making money, then that's not going to work. So yeah, everybody's part of that. That's a great point. Now, I always end up sort of, I think I always like to ask a couple of questions at the end, and it's funny because you kind of alluded to it a little bit at the beginning. You were like, if I was looking back and speaking to 22-year-old me, and that's absolutely a question that I'd love to ask from people, because when I look back at my younger self, there's a million pieces of advice that I would give myself, you know, other than buy crypto, buy Bitcoin, and invest in Amazon, right? Just those ones would be quite early on. But I mean, you know, serious bits of advice. So when you look back at, you know, if you could sort of leave a message, go back to the future and leave a message for
Right.
yourself for a career to help your career, what do you think the sort of one piece of advice you would give an early career Larry?
Yeah, what would I change, right? Like, and the answer is everything, right? But but this is how you got here. It's funny. I think I was fortunate. I've had an executive coach, and executive coach does a 360, and they're like, "Hey, great news! Did the 360. You're doing great. Everyone loves you. Great performance. You just have to change everything about yourself in the way, right? Like that's how it feels. Right?
Right.
That's how it feels. Um, I, the one thing that sticks out to me is, and this comes from my background, right? I was an Air Force Academy grad. I was a pilot. I was in the military. I went to GE. Like the, they instantly just hit you with a hammer and mold you into this mold of like, this is what a leader looks like. This is what and and it's getting back to the diversity thing, right? Like diversity matters. And so, what I would say is, as part of that, I've I am not empathetic by nature. And in particular, as you become an executive, that empathetic leadership, servant leadership is really, really important. And that ability to have empathy and to understand. And even just as a security, like forget being an executive, as a security leader, right? It's being able to walk in the shoes of the developers, of the IT team, of the or whatnot. And so for me, I was too rough around the edges, just too direct, and so having some empathy and just being a softer, kinder, gentler version of myself, I think would have accelerated my career, faster than I've been able to accelerate it without.
I love that. Brilliant. Yeah, I look, hey, more empathy in the world, right? We need to be telling each other to be kind, not only to everyone else, but also to ourselves often, right? You know, we can sometimes be our,
Yeah,
our own harshest
true.
critics as well. So that's great. Well, look, um, let's finish things off like just by me. I'm a recruiter. I have a recruiting business. A lot of the people that I imagine that are going to be watching this are people that are trying to stand out from, especially the current market, right? There's a sea of applications for every position that's out there. What's that one thing that if you were giving some advice to people that are applying for jobs, whether they're entry level, experienced, whatever they're doing, what's the thing or things that they can do that you think might help them stand out from other people on those applications, or when you're interviewing or speaking to them? What do they need to do?
Yeah, the only thing I've found that works is the network, right? It really is about who those connections and things. And at an entry level, maybe you can stand out with a certification or something, right? But I have been fortunate to have been pulled places, or to have gone to work with a friend or whatnot, and have watched that happen, or get people from my team into other roles, with other folks, or people that I've used to work with, and so I think us taking care of each other is really what gets you to stand out. That personal recommendation makes a huge difference. Even in working with recruiters, as I've worked with recruiters, they're executive recruiters for some of the upper level roles. 9 times out of 10, it's not the recruiter who reaches out and says, "Hey, I've got an opportunity at Company X." They reached out to one of your friends and said, "I have an opportunity at Company X." And either they said, "Well, reach out to Larry," or they told me, "Hey, there's this company." And so you get it that way. And, one of the things I'm on some boards, but more like nonprofit, private, et cetera. I have not been on a publicly traded board. And as I've gone through that journey of, okay, how do I get on a publicly traded board? Everybody's like, "Where's your board bio?" And I mean, I don't know. Like, no, I don't have a board bio. And until I sat with a peer and, she was great and said, "Oh, let me send you mine," and all, like, now I have a board bio. But it was through my network, through a peer, that I can even now present myself in a way that's appropriate to stand out. Right. And without that hint and without stealing her, her work, right, I wouldn't stand out in the same way that, I stand out more today than I did before because of that. And so I think our peers, people that we work with, and it's really important to have that network developed and keep it active.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I think that's always, always my number one go-to. I don't know whether I'd have a career at all, or even, whether I'd have a career at all, or certainly not a business without sort of all the networking I did. And I didn't necessarily do it with that in mind when I started. I just wanted to learn and know more about the industry, and met a whole load of friends now, that I get to go and meet up with in conferences and catch up with, and people I genuinely love and enjoy having time with. And yeah, so it's amazing. It's amazing how that can help. And I think even when you're early career, volunteering and getting involved with your ISSA chapters or your Cloud Security Alliance chapters, or ISC2, whatever it might be, there's probably whole bunches of communities of security people, whether you're in a town or a city. There's probably more people than you'd expect that are interested in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Larry, thank you so much. I so appreciate your time. It's been so easy just to chat and gas for ages. I'm sure. Sure.
A ton of fun. So appreciate the time and the invitation again. So thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Route to CISO podcast. If there's something you really want me to ask on the next episode, or if you're a CISO who wants to inspire the next generation, please reach out. I'll leave a URL to my LinkedIn profile, and make sure you connect and message me there. We're always looking for feedback, so please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.